This is the Gang of Witches Ibiza podcast, hosted by Jo Youle. Each new moon, we'll explore with our guests how to think globally and act locally with ecofeminism. Awaken all your senses. The spirit of the witches comes to your ears. The Sabbath is that way. Gang of Witches.
Welcome back to the Gang of Witches Ibiza podcast with me, Jo Youle. And for this edition of the show, we're diving deep under the waters of the Balearic Sea that surrounds the Pitiusas Islands to find out what state we're in locally when it comes to our marine ecosystems, our aquatic life, and what warning signs we should be hearing and seeing now to fight against climate change. We are far too slowly coming to understand the environmental effects of global warming. One of those effects, according to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is that with the recent increase of 1.5 degrees in the warming of our waters, we stand to lose 70 to 90% of our coral reefs at this temperature. Now, this temperature looks set to go up to 3 degrees by the end of the century, and right now, the coral plays home to a quarter of marine life. They're the bunkers of our biodiversity, and it's an understatement to say that their loss will have a huge impact on the health of our seas. We cannot have a healthy planet without having a healthy sea surrounding us, soaking up the carbon or at least offsetting so much of it that in summertime in the Balearics comes mostly from the sky. And so much of that is swallowed up by the very healthy and incredibly huge network we have on our side locally, and that is the aquatic lungs known as the Posidonia. Around Formentera specifically, there is a Posidonia meadow that may be the largest clonal colony on Earth, and it's estimated to be 100,000 years old. But like everything else in our waters, this network is also under major threat. So today, I want to take a dip under the surface of all of this with two very special ladies from the Marilles Foundation, Raquel Vaquer, who coordinates the State of the Balearic Sea Project, an initiative that brings together research institutions and local government bodies to assess the condition of the marine environment and its threats, and her colleague, Natalia Barrientos, who is the other key worker for the State of the Balearic Sea Project. The pair work closely together to gather existing data and information and turn it into user-friendly content. And they're based here in Mallorca, where I've just arrived this morning to have this conversation in their offices. Ladies, welcome to the Gang of Witches Ibiza podcast.
Thank you, Jo, for inviting us.
Well, thank you for making the time and to have me here in the offices this morning. But first off, let's find out a little bit more about the Marilles Foundation, which was set up in 2017. Who exactly is the foundation made up of, and what exactly do you guys do, Natalia?
So the Marilles Foundation has different projects, and I was hired in 2019 to work with the Balearic Sea Report project. And it was a new idea that Marilles Foundation initiated together with other collaborators such as the main research institutions and the Balearic Islands government to make annual reports with the Balearic Sea data, everything related to it, from fishing fleet to invasive species, cetaceans, all you can think that it could be related to the Balearic Sea. Put all the data together in an easy and nice way, making graphics and having a summary of the main topics. And it's what now we have in the website, informemarbalear.org.
And thank you. So, I mean, you ladies are both highly qualified in this area. And Natalia, I see that you've got a PhD in marine geology. And your passion is the study of the ocean climate link through some tiny animals called foraminifera. Can you tell us a little bit about why they might be important to help us fight climate change?
I understand it's a tricky name, foraminifera. It's a Latin name that says for whole bearers, because these tiny animals, which can be shortened by the word forams, calcify a shell and they are as big as a salt or sand grain. And the chemistry of their shell can be analyzed, for instance, the metals it has, and you can guess what was the temperature when that shell was formed. Therefore, you can delve into the past climates thanks to the chemistry of their shells. Also, the species you found, some species prefer warmer waters, some colder, or the habitats, some live floating, others buried beneath the sediment, so they tell you plenty of stories, and that's what I was doing in Sweden for my PhD, in particular in Arctic environments, Arctic and Antarctic. So now I'm into the Mediterranean thanks to this project.
And that's what sort of led you to working at the Marilles Foundation?
Exactly, yeah.
So Raquel, I see you also have a PhD in marine sciences, not to mention many, many years of research experience with a particular focus on marine biogeochemistry and our amazing local resource, the magical Balearic seagrass, our Posidonia. So I want to talk specifically about that a little bit later on in a bit more depth. But first off, what makes you so passionate about working for the Marilles Foundation?
So I'm very happy for working at Marilles Foundation that's devoted to conserve the Balearic Sea. The Balearic Sea is subject to numerous pressures, and I think that we really need more organizations that are working to really put the focus on conserving our ecosystems that provide us a lot of ecosystem services. When I was working on science, I was focused on the pressures affecting the coastal ecosystems, but I missed the conservation part because we know how these pressures are affecting the ecosystems, but we are not helping to stop these pressures and helping the ecosystems to recover.
So in 2015, the Ecofeminism Foundation, which is almost like the parent organisation of Marilles, commissioned a study which identified the Balearics as one of the healthiest and best preserved marine environments in the Mediterranean, but one which was under growing threat. 2 years of local research later, and it became clear that rapid action to conserve the area would have a good chance of working, and Marilles was founded to focus on this goal. So let's start with how would you define the threats and the exact goal that was in the minds of those, Natalia, who set the foundation up?
So as you said, since the Balearic Sea seemed to be better preserved as other regions of the Mediterranean Sea, this could serve actually as a laboratory and for marine conservation, and then be able to replicate in other areas of the Mediterranean or even in other oceans. So it could be like a good starting point and a case study to focus on this sea that we have surrounding the islands.
And how would you say, as a group, that you learned that this was so important to facilitate dialogue between NGOs, experts, the government and the private sector to try and ensure that all the efforts are strategically aligned?
Yes, of course, to ensure an effective marine conservation, you need to take into account all the stakeholders and NGOs, fishermen, the government and tourism and the users. Everyone has something to say about conservation and everyone has something to do. So that's we really think that we need to take into account everyone, and in Marilles Foundation we are very inclusive and we speak with all the different groups.
So reading the Balearic Sea Report, which is available on your website that you've already mentioned, obviously I learned a lot, but also through conversations on this podcast that really for Ibiza and the other islands in the Balearics to have economic prosperity within the Balearics, the sea and the coastline of the Pitiusas Islands must be healthy. Now, that is the key. And, those systems have been put in place or must be put in place to keep our ecology thriving in the marine world, to attract business and tourism and large companies that invest into the island's economic systems. So, Natalia, what would you say that these intentions of the report are driven by, or who are the main investors or the ones driving this movement forward?
Yeah, so it's well known that the economic prosperity of the islands is closely linked with the environmental quality of their coastlines and seas. And therefore, enterprises play a key role in investing properly, in maintaining these seas healthy. Also, the government, where does it invest? For instance, in marine reserves. The areas of marine reserves we have has been increasing during the years, although the investment on them has been more steady since 2007. So therefore, it's important that both government and private sectors get together to get a healthier sea for a better economy and sustainability in the end.
So I will say that the most important threats that we can fight are global warming, so trying to reduce our carbon footprint. If you are a sailor, never anchor over Posidonia, because you are taking apart big parts of the plant that it will require years or decades, depending on the size of the spot, to recover. So never anchor on Posidonia, reduce global warming, and also have good water quality. Posidonia increases water quality, but also requires this good water quality to be able to live, because it's a plant, so it makes photosynthesis and needs transparent waters that allow the light to arrive to their leaves. So in the case of Ibiza, the wastewater treatment plant is not working well, and it's the water that are dumping into the sea are not compiling the quality standards that are established. So now there are plans to build a new wastewater treatment plant. So it's on process, but this will be very important in the future to protect the Posidonia meadows.
They do. We all do, for sure. And I love the fact, actually, that this idea, kind of came into being, because I think absolutely information is power. And without that knowledge, how is anybody ever going to take action? So I think it's incredibly positive and amazing, the work that you both do. So thank you for that. So in August, I read the article in The Guardian with your director, Ariel Esteban, who sadly couldn't be here with us today. But it showed how one MPA, or marine protected area in Mallorca, delivered a 10-fold return on investment, with benefits for fishing, biodiversity and tourism, which obviously sounds like a win-win situation. The economy is boosted and the ecosystems also fight back under this idea. But I'm kind of interested if you are able to just tell us a little bit more about those findings as part of the European MPA Networks project, or maybe a little bit about what natural capital is, which was mentioned in the article, and how it works in relation to an MPA and what can be recovered.
Aniol will be the best person to answer that question, but I think that here the take-home message is that when we protect areas, everyone benefits of it. Not only the ecosystems and the nature, but also economics and the people that lives in that area. We must remember that there was a strong opposition for the declaration of this protected area, but now with the time, looking to the past, now we see that it was the correct decision.
Thank you, Raquel. That's really interesting. And I think, having read or, kind of skimmed the article, I mean, the data is kind of showing that obviously the overall value of tourism, diving and boating and increased fishing in the MPA amounted to 3.1 million euros, which I was kind of amazed. That's obviously, a huge potential saving in the long run, or boost to the economy, which is incredible. And I think some people might feel like this is coming down to the money that can be made from improving things for profit-making purposes. But of course, how can that be a bad thing if the quality of our water and the health of our seas is helped through this, if you will, capitalist system?
Yeah, for now, at the Balearic Sea Report, we don't gather this information. We would like to amplify this concept in the socioeconomical section we have. But we do have many other indicators that show good ecological improvements after the creation of marine reserves or marine protected areas. For instance, one is that the number of fish stocks increase. So there are regions, for instance, in the marine reserve of Els Freus de Ibiza y Formentera, where the number of species has increased 3.5. So now you have 6 species in transects of 250 square meters, which is the highest level we have recorded in the rest of the marine reserves. And other good news is that, people enjoy more diving into marine reserves because the fishes are more like, they hide less, so you can see a grouper without it goes quickly and hide thinking you will catch him. No? So there are many benefits out of it that are shown in the report, and more indicators that we aim to add.
What I did love was that according to the study carried out by your foundation, was that the protected areas have generated €10 in benefits for each euro invested in the MPA. So my next question is, we've just talked about this, 3.1 million euros that's been raised, but I guess, I'm just wondering where that money actually goes that's been made from the ecosystems. Has it been put back into the protection pot, or does it line the pockets of the hotels and the resorts and tourism that, for example, Mallorca, and also the rest of the Pitiusas Islands has a lot of? Raquel, I'm just wondering if you can give us a little bit more information on that.
Regrettably, we don't have that information now. Probably we will have more in the future. I will guess that part of the benefits go to the fishermen and part of the benefits go to the touristic companies, but we don't know how they invest that money.
I understand that you guys are sort of, more marine biologists rather than sort of accountants, but I think, the last thing I do want to say about the MPA, as you said, it benefits the fishermen, and it was actually set up at the request of the Rajada Fishermen's Association in 2007, which has, vastly improved the fishing in the area and made it easier to actually regulate leisure activities, slowed coastal erosion and improved water quality and biodiversity, which is all, very positive and very wonderful. But I'm interested as to why MPAs in the Balearic Islands and the rest of Spain are massively underfunded. And I get, again, I know that this is more Aniel's area, but I just wondered, if you know anything about that at all, or why that might actually be, if all this amazing results are coming from the MPAs, which I know that, Spain specifically have said by 2030 they are going to be, creating a lot more of. But, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of money in the pot for this kind of thing. And there's a lot of money being made from their health. Health is wealth, as we know. So it's just an interesting question. If you don't know the answer, it really doesn't matter.
So, I really think that marine protected areas need more investment, as Natalia said, and they report a lot of benefits, so it's a shame that they are not more funded and that there is not more money to make to set new protected areas and to make them that are really protected. So with human resources that assure that the protection is effective.
So on this podcast, we've talked about some of the difficulties there in terms of the financials, but, we like to also talk about the very positive things that are happening also and give, people hope. So it is exciting that Spain is committed to declaring 30% of its waters as marine protected areas by 2030, as I just mentioned. But, your area of specialism and the thing that you guys focus all your awareness and intentions and work on is the Balearic Sea Report, which I think is just such an amazing thing, as I've said before, that you guys do publish every year. In April of this year, we had the last edition. And I just, let's start with you, Natalia. What were the main objectives for this year's report? How was it compiled? And who do you think it helps?
So in April, as you said, we published the second version. And when we compare the first with the second, what we can see is that we are trying to improve the content, because what are the key pieces for the Balearic Sea is crucial to put all the information together. So therefore we have classified all the information in 10 chapters. This is what is different from last year, so that people can easily dive into all the information. And especially this year, since we collect trends, yearly trends, what is interesting to focus on is the changes produced by the COVID-19. And you can observe them mainly on the pressures, like human pressures, how the numbers of maritime transport has went down, or even the people numbers, tourism. All this is reflected in the report. And I think it's important to observe how data can just move by this disease and observe the trends. Also, it will be very interesting to observe what happens this year. And we will continue collecting data in other reports, yearly reports.
So I love the fact on the website that you say, together we're stronger to fight or face the sea's challenges. One of our previous podcast guests, Sandra Benveniste, who I believe is actually on your advisory board, but at the time she was director of Ibiza Preservation, she said that if we want to go fast, we go alone. If we want to go far, we go together. And for me, having read parts of the report, it really feels like, with this many collaborators putting this report together, as well as with you and all the people that you have involved in this foundation, the impact of this work is going to go a long way to hopefully raising awareness, but also finding solutions to fix the challenges that we're facing. So let's get into the things that we found with the report or in the report. And I'd love to start with the state of the corals because, as I mentioned in the introduction, they are home to a quarter of all marine life. And with the warming of our waters, things are looking a little bit bleak. Can you tell us a little bit about the findings of the report in terms of the sea habitats?
So we have in the Mediterranean, we have deep sea corals, so they are not only on the surfaces making reefs, but you can also find them isolated in the marine deserts at up to 1,000 meters water depth. You can find species of corals which are not only species but create habitats, and that's why they are so crucial for the marine environment, because you can create a three-dimensional structure out in the mud on the marine desert, so then fishes can go there and lay their eggs, and a tiny ecosystem is created there. But we know that they are there thanks to the new underwater technologies that have been developed in the last decades, because of course a diver cannot reach these depths. And that's why it's crucial to have a proper mapping of the Balearic Sea to know where these species grow, where these habitats are. And some of the species are critically endangered. For instance, we have the bamboo coral, which is a species that is not doing so well, mainly due to trawling activities. Therefore, it's crucial to have a good mapping of the areas and therefore direct the fishing efforts in different regions. For instance, they liked to habiting on seamounts. For instance, between Ibiza and Mallorca, we have the Mallorca Channel with underwater with seamounts, the Ausias Mark and Ses Olivas. Also in the Emile Badot Escarpment, these are regions where deep sea corals thrive, and therefore regions that needs to be protected and looked up. And to go back to your question about the water becoming warmer, some of these species do calcify, and therefore we have this global issue called ocean acidification, which is that if the ocean catch up more CO2 from the atmosphere, the waters can get more acidic and therefore can fragment these very fragile organisms. So it's everything very closely linked in terms of global change. It mostly affects every species.
So another way that warming can affect corals, especially not the deep sea corals, but more shallow corals, is because when in summer with warming there is a stratification, and as summer is getting longer with warming, so the time that the stratification persists is longer, and some corals and other benthic organisms can die of starvation because they depend on the food that comes from the surface. And when there is stratification, there is no flow of food from the surface to the bottom. So this is one of the mechanisms that has been seen that warming is negatively affecting benthic ecosystems. Talking about other habitats, warming is also negatively affecting marine plants, such as the Posidonia meadows, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. Posidonia is very sensitive to warmer temperatures. At a temperature higher than 28 Celsius degree, it increases its mortality. So they start dying when the temperature goes up. Some other negative effects for Posidonia meadows is that normally with warmer temperature there are more algal blooms, and when these algal blooms die, they sink to the bottom, and there they are consumed by bacteria that it decreases the oxygen content of the water. And in the bottom, it creates like a dead zone in the bottom, and it also increases a substance that is very toxic to most forms of life that is called sulfhydric, that it makes like the smell like a rotten eggs. So it also can intrude the roots of the Posidonia, and it also makes that the Posidonia die. Other negative effects of warming on coastal ecosystems in general is that all the organisms, there is a range that the organisms can survive. So there is a thermal range for all organisms where they feel okay, and the organisms that they move, they can go to colder areas, but the ones that are attached to the substrate, they can't move. So they have to adapt or die. And with the ones that move, we can see that there will be a change in the species distribution, because they will move to colder waters to be in their optimal range. And another negative effect could be related to invasive species. Most invasive species arriving to the Mediterranean are from a tropical origin. So now there is a factor that is called tropicalization of the Mediterranean, where more tropical species are coming here and are staying because they are thriving well in the Mediterranean because it's getting warmer. So this can be a problem depending on the nature of the invasive species. For instance, not in the Balearics yet, but in the Eastern Mediterranean, there are the rabbit fishes that they are very voracious and they eat a lot of alga and Posidonia, and they created deserts in some areas of Greece because they are eating all the alga and all the plants that they can find. So warming is posing the Mediterranean ecosystem under threat.
So much information there. I'm absolutely loving this. Thank you. I think, one thing that we haven't gone into great detail yet on this podcast is the magical powers of the Posidonia. And I've been dying to have this conversation for a really long time. And obviously that's your area of specialism, Raquel. So, in essence, a lot of people know, that they are the aquatic lungs of Ibiza. Without them, clearly we would have much more polluted waters. Things would be a lot more cloudy. But instead, despite a lot of bad behavior on our seas, specifically in Ibiza, we see a lot of boats and a lot of pollution, toxic waste going into the water. We are incredibly blessed to still have these clear crystal waters, which really is nothing short of a miracle. And it's the reason, behind what the Posidonia can create. And I think it's, quite distressing really to hear that it is under threat. And you've obviously elaborated and given us some of the things that it's facing and the problems that are popping up as a result of global warming. But what other, there's so many threats to the Posidonia, which is obviously very worrying and a little bit scary. But, what else can you tell us? Because obviously that's something that you've spent a lot of time studying.
Yes, as you said, Posidonia are the lungs of the Mediterranean. We have these crystal waters and white sand beaches thanks to Posidonia. Posidonia is an ecosystem creating habitat. It increases a lot the diversity. It's a nursery area for a lot of fishes, some of them of fisheries importance. And it's the home for a lot of invertebrates, mollusk, snails, and that then they will be the sand that we have in the beaches. It also decreases the energy of the waves and reduces its power. So it makes that we have beaches. It reduces the erosion of the coastal areas. It produces oxygen and is an important carbon sink. So it is negatively affected by global warming, but is also an important actor reducing global warming. There has been a study that shows between 7 and 8% of the island's emissions are absorbed by the Posidonia meadows of the Balearics. So as we can see, it's really important. It has a very important role in sequestering carbon. This is not only because of its high metabolic rates, but also because it traps the particle from the surrounding water. So it traps a lot of carbon that's in the water. So if we lose Posidonia meadows, we will lose the ecosystem services it provides, but we will also lose its capacity of carbon sink, and the carbon that has been trapped during millennia could be released again to the water and eventually to the atmosphere. So we really need to conserve these very important habitats because, they have this important role.
Once upon a time in Ibiza with Olivia.
Cuando me despierto, el sol se va a dormir. Nunca le estoy viendo, pero sé que está ahí. Me llamo luna llena, me acaban de decir. Me llamo luna llena, qué hermoso es vivir. Cuando me despierto.
Last full moon we danced under a blue moon, the second full moon in the last month. A special event like this deserves a special poem. Once in a blue moon. In life's journey through the common, through the grasses and the sands, when all can seem the same, it's that which is different that I love. That which is so rare, so beautiful, and uncommonly found, it hides behind the shelter until it comes out of the ground. For only once in a blue moon is there sunshine and rain. Only once in a blue moon does laughter mix freely with tears. In life's journey of constant noise where stopping seems forbidden, I love such a silence when between us silence can sustain. For only once in a blue moon comes such peace between souls. Only once in a blue moon can such a connection unfold. So let me say to my girl, I am so eternally grateful that one fateful blue moon we were blown together.
Mis hermanas, noches iluminadas, todo se puede ver. Me llamo luna llena, me acaban de decir. Me llamo luna llena, qué hermoso es vivir. Cuando me despido, el sol me ayuda, viene con calorcito a calentar nuestra tierra. Me llamo luna llena, me acaban de decir. Me llamo luna llena, qué hermoso es vivir.
So we're talking about the blue carbon. What is offset, for example, the planes that come into Ibiza, in abundance. Literally, you look up to the sky, they're coming every few minutes. And, that's kind of incredible, really, that the Posidonia can kind of suck up some of that, right? But you said 8%. That's still not a lot, really, in the grand scheme of everything that we do that's bad, right, in terms of emissions. So that is very interesting to know. Thank you. I think just, lastly, before we move on, what can we actually do to help preserve it? Because obviously it is the number one key, or the thing that we already have that is healthy, to fight climate change. So what can we do to, protect it?
So I will say that the most important threats that we can fight are global warming, so trying to reduce our carbon footprint. If you are a sailor, never anchor over Posidonia, because you are taking apart big parts of the plant that it will require years or decades, depending on the size of the spot, to recover. So never anchor on Posidonia, reduce global warming, and also have good water quality. Posidonia increases water quality, but also requires this good water quality to be able to live, because it's a plant, so it makes photosynthesis and needs transparent waters that allow the light to arrive to their leaves. So in the case of Ibiza, the wastewater treatment plant is not working well, and it's the water that are dumping into the sea are not compiling the quality standards that are established. So now there are plans to build a new wastewater treatment plant. So it's on process, but this will be very important in the future to protect the Posidonia meadows.
It's interesting what you're saying there about the toxic waste issue that Ibiza faces, and it was obviously going to come up in my questions a little bit further down the line. But seeing as we've just mentioned it, why? Why is our toxic waste system in such a mess? It's not been like that for a year or two. It's been like that since I've lived in Ibiza, which is almost 10 years. So, it worries me that with the amount of money being made on Ibiza, that, that can't have been fixed by now. And in fact, if I looked at the Ibiza preservation study that was made recently, the quality of the water in a year where we haven't had hardly any tourists compared to normal has actually decreased. So I'm interested, that was part of the report about the water quality. But first, Natalia, it seemed like you wanted to add something about the Posidonia and obviously dropping anchor on that.
Yeah, it's actually a response that the government of the Balearic Islands is having to protect Posidonia oceanica, and is the Posidonia oceanica monitoring service, which is vessels where environmental agents are in, and they observe if the other ships are actually anchored on Posidonia or not. Therefore, they inform. They made you move if it's needed to places with sand or with buoys, like for ecological mooring. And they can also issue infringement notices. So we capture this data in the report, and we see the trends. It's true that we don't have many years for this data to make any conclusions, but we will still sum up them.
I think that's really important that you've raised that as an issue, because, I know that Ibiza Preservation has actually mapped the whole of the Posidonia network around the island that we live on. And that's, something that people do need to know about, that before they hire a boat, that they need to understand, they can't just stop wherever they feel like if they're going to drop anchor, because obviously we need to keep that whole network healthy. And it's really, really, really important, as you've just been talking about, Raquel. But I want to go back to what you were saying about obviously one of the other major threats to the Posidonia that I don't think gets talked about enough at all. And that is the fact that Ibiza specifically has a bit of a toxic waste issue. And I know, it's pretty obvious that tourism hasn't been as prevalent on any of the Pitiusas Islands for the last 2 years. Obviously last year was maybe 2 months maximum of tourism, July and August, and this year has been about the same, except there has been a recent report saying that the quality of our water particularly on sort of 3 or 4 or even 5 beaches, has gone down considerably. And this is clearly directly in correlation with the information that you've just divulged there. And I find it very weird that Ibiza, economically and from a capitalist perspective, makes a lot of money. So why, particularly as tourism is one of the main economic indicators of keeping a healthy ecosystem there in terms of the finances and supporting the people that live there, why has this not been fixed before now? So it's an interesting idea that you've mentioned, and I think it definitely needs, I would love to hear your input if that's something that you're able to answer for us.
So the wastewater treatment plant in Ibiza, in Vila, it was constructed under a new technology at the moment, but it never worked out. They realized that it wasn't working some years ago, and because the quality of the wastewater that is being dumped into the sea is not good enough. The bureaucracy is really slow. They tried to build a new one years ago, but now it's really under construction. So probably in some years it will be fixed. I think it should have been faster. And regarding the water quality in different areas of Ibiza that has decreased in the last year, it can be related to other things, not only the wastewater treatment plant from Ibiza, because a lot of houses that are not connected to the wastewater system, so they can leak into the sea. This is one of the causes. Another is the boats. A lot of boats, they don't close the dirty water system, so they are leaking the water into the coastal areas all the time. Last year there was not a lot of tourism, but there was a lot of nautical tourism because people was feeling that they were more safe in a boat, and it can also be one of the causes that the water quality decreased. I think that water quality should be on the focus, and we need to really go to the real sources of pollution and cut them.
I think that's all very interesting stuff to note. I mean, you talked about the potential threat to the Posidonia, but specifically within the context of the Sea Report, what are the threats that the Balearic Sea, not just in Ibiza, but also, I'm assuming this water quality is also not so good in other areas of the Balearic Sea. So, what are the implications of that bad quality for species or anything other than just purely the Posidonia? Can you tell us?
So yes, in the Balearic Sea Report, we have seen that the water quality has decreased over the years, but we also need to keep in mind that the water quality of the Balearic Islands is good. Is not that bad. Is better than other areas in the Mediterranean, but it has decreased over the years. So we really need to solve this, and what we need to do is to cut the pollution areas. So as the effluents from wastewater treatment plants, we should try not to dump this water into the ocean. The water should be reused in land. And so we need to cut all leakages from septic tanks, and we also need that all the boats don't dump dirty waters into the seas, that they empty their tanks in the harbor or the marinas. And also another source of pollution could be the agricultural lands when the fertilizers have been used massively, so we need to reduce the fertilizers used in agriculture. And another important thing that we could do is to separate the pipelines from the rainwater to sewage. Because now in most towns the pipeline is the same. So when there is a strong storm, when it rains, there is leakage into the sea, because the system cannot assume all this water. So this is an important source of pollution in coastal areas. That also implies that there are fecal pollution, so there are some bacteria that go into the water that can be not only dangerous for the ecosystem but also for human health. and we really need to separate this collection of water.
Yes, just to point out that we have also data from the fecal bacteria of around almost 200 different points of the Balearic Islands. Actually, in Ibiza, 41 points are analyzed yearly. And in general, as you said, 8% has worsened the quality in 2020. 2 have improved, and 90 has stayed the same. So it's very interesting, as you said, no? Like we had less human pressure, but still these things are there. And the beaches that had less quality for Ibiza were Talamanca and Sant Antoni in 2020. So all can be linked, maybe to the reasons Raquel explained.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, it's something that I can't wrap my head around. The reasons for that, as I said before, I've said I said what I needed to say, but I just don't understand why it hasn't been sorted out sooner, and that those places remain problem areas. But obviously, as you said, Raquel, it is being addressed, and it will be hopefully fixed very, very soon, with luck, especially for next summer. So just a few more points, but I think we said we were going to talk about key species, because I went to, I don't know if you've actually been yourself, both of you, but I went to the exhibition on Formentera at the lighthouse of La Mola recently, and I was really blown away by just how many species there are in our seas. But what are the key findings of that report in terms of species that have either increased or decreased or are in danger? Natalia, I don't know if you want to come back with us some information about that.
Yeah, sure. So there is a very sad story regarding one of the Mediterranean most key species, which is the nacra. Pinna nobilis is the Latin name, and pen shell is the English name. And probably many people will have heard that most of them in autumn of 2016 died. So now it's in danger of extinction since 2016, and is a mortality event that is still going on. And that was caused by a parasite called Aplosporidium pinnae. And before the mortality event, for instance, in Ibiza, there were censuses where divers identified 70 in Ibiza and 113 in Formentera. And now in the whole Balearic Sea, we have about 10 specimens. Well, that based on the data we got in December 2020. So is in danger of extinction. So they are studying the individuals that have survived to understand why they survived and what is the place where they thrive the most, or also the spread of this parasite if it comes through currents, and try to avoid. Also, they are collecting from the Imedea. Well, both these studies are carried out by the Oceanographic Institute and the Imedea. And also in collaboration with the government, they are putting together the effort, and also citizen science. If you find a living pen shell, you have to report it and give a location and bring pictures if you happen to do snorkel, because these organisms live up to 60 meters water depth, so from 0.5 to 60 meters. So it's very important to put together all the effort if anyone observes them. And in the same genus, but another species, is the rough pen shell. Pinna rudis is the Latin name.
Before you continue, can I just ask what a pen shell is?
Sure, Jo. It's actually very important to pinpoint the special features of this species. Is mollusk. It's a bivalve. And it's the largest bivalve on the Mediterranean. It can actually has 1.2 meters on height. So it's very large, and it's crucial because it sustains the living of other species, and it lives fixed on the sea bottom for up about 50 years. So it also shows a lot about the quality of the water, because if that pen shell has been there for many years is because maybe it thrives there. So it was a very indicative species that we no longer have in the amounts we used to. So it's very important to continue study their locations and see if we can recover this species, this key species. And as I was telling before, we had the rough pen shell, which has not been affected by this parasite. And for instance, in Cabrera, there are studies that have shown that has the highest density of the world, which is about 7 individuals per 100 square meters. So with the species is that, some of them are doing better than others, although, we need to be constantly studying them to make to understand them and know that they are there and they thrive.
Raquel, we're just going to come to you, but I just want to ask one more question about the lice, because I was watching a documentary recently about the salmon farms in Scotland, and this woman, this really amazing oceanographer and scientist and marine biologist, has basically said no more fish farms because of the lice. And I was wondering, I mean, I know that there are a couple of fish farms near Ibiza, and I just wonder if that could be any kind of influence on, maybe some of the dangers that the pen shell is facing. Do you think that there could be any direct correlation between those two things, just out of interest, Raquel?
So one of the theories is that this parasite could arrive through aquaculture with shellfish farming of oysters, and it could have been worsened because of warming. I
mean, that's really interesting and obviously quite disgusting, really, isn't it, that is an issue because, I mean, I know that fishing is one of the themes in the report, and we've had a whole episode of the Gang of Witches podcast where we were looking at the things talked about in Seaspiracy specifically. And of course, fishing is not a bad thing if it's done in the traditions and in line with, the Mpas, and obviously people like Peixe Nostrum, for example, in Ibiza, that have a specific structure in place to encourage the replenishment of the ecosystem. That kind of angle makes sense. But as we know, why would there be fish farming in the Balearic Seas when, in theory, we've got quite an abundance of fish? We've got the systems in place to recreate, the supply and the kind of species coming back. So, why do we have to have fish farms in Ibiza? It just feels very, very, very unorganic and, not in keeping with all the wonderful work that you do. So, that feels sad to me to hear that could be a reason for wonderful, organisms dying out that we really need and that we really love.
So I would like to add that this die-off event didn't start it on the Balearics. It started in the mainland in Spain and is spreading through the east. So the theory that say that the fish farming could be one of the causes, it will be the fish farming in the mainland, not in the Balearics.
But it still came from fish farming, which, again, I think that, throws a bit of a spotlight on the issues with fish farming. It's not a good thing to be recreating species that aren't, organically having a free and happy life. I mean, let's not get into meat farming and all the disgusting things I've been watching recently. But, I think when you push something to do something that's not natural, like amplify and procreate in an environment that's not, as I said, with enough space and movement, freedom of movement, then bad things happen. So, look at Scotland. I mean, I was disgusted and horrified to watch what's actually happening over there. And when you see this salmon that we've all been eating, I mean, maybe you haven't, but I probably did when I lived in England, it's not good. And it's, that's what happens when humans interfere with any ecosystem, right? So it's, again, very important work that you're doing. So we've talked about the pen shell, but I also wanted to talk about, the several species of rays and sharks in the Balearics. Most of them are endangered. Is that, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that really interests me, specifically the sharks, obviously. Are there sharks in the Balearics? I didn't know. I didn't know that. But, that's sad to hear that they are actually under threat as well.
So we don't have yet any indicator about rays and sharks in the Balearic Sea Report, but we plan to have some in the future. But what we know is that most sharks and rays are decreasing in the Mediterranean and they are endangered. And having sharks will be a very good news. And we usually had a lot of sharks here, but regrettably, we are having less. Sharks have a very long life cycles, so they need a lot of years to reproduce. And this could be one of the causes that they are decreasing. So in the past, there have been a lot of fishing pressures on sharks. So yeah, it has been common meal here. and because they have these long life cycles, they don't recover fast enough from fisheries. And also, I will say that the movie Jaws was really bad for the conservation of sharks. And yeah, because in the imaginary of everyone, all sharks are really dangerous and we should run away if there are sharks. And it's the opposite. If there are sharks, it's because we have a healthy ecosystem.
Sure, I'm sure a lot of people, know that sharks can be dangerous, but clearly the kinds of ones that frequent this environment are not, great whites or anything to be scared of. I think, what you just said there about the fishing factor is important to mention and go back to, because I think, you also talked about one of the threats to habitat and Posidonia is the trawling. And I know that obviously, particularly with Pitiusas, as we talked about in a previous episode, that trawling is decreased massively in terms of their fleet. I think there's only one trawling boat, but that's not to say there's not other boats from the mainland or other areas that do come in and still, do their thing. And obviously bycatch is one of the biggest things mentioned in Seaspiracy. And I think that could well be one of the number one reasons that the sharks potentially are decreasing in the area, and that that is very, very sad to hear.
So in the bright side of the species in the Balearic, I would like to talk about the sea turtles, because there has been records that probably they were nesting in the Balearic beaches like in the 19th century, but there were no records lately. And in 2019, there was the first record of two nests in Ibiza beaches. Indeed, one in Platja d'Embossa and another in Escaballet. And in 2020, there were three nests in Balearic Island beaches, two in Menorca and one in Ibiza. So this year so far, no nests have. We didn't find any nests, but it's not too late. Maybe the nests were not found at the moment that the female go to the beach to lay the eggs, but maybe we can find some nests when the turtles hatch out from the egg. So keep an eye on the beaches at the end of August and beginning of September. And if you find some sea turtles, you can call to the 112 and report where they have been found. Don't touch them and don't go close with animals or things like that. But we can still have more turtles coming to reproduce to our beaches.
Amazing. I mean, that's really a lovely thing to maybe end today's podcast on, with a bit of, as we said before, it's not all doom and gloom out there. The water is, maybe going down in some areas, but also increasing in others, and is still pretty high quality in the grand scheme of things, or otherwise all these wonderful species wouldn't be there in the first place. And I just think, I'm really, really grateful for the work that you do and that you have the funding for that, which is incredible. I mean, in conclusion, I think obviously we're probably going to be sitting back here next April, perhaps, having a conversation about the new report that's coming out. And I think, it would be really interesting to find out, when Aniel gets back, kind of where that money goes. I'm not going to let that one drop. Not going to let that one drop. It'd be very intriguing to know a little bit more about the expenditure or the income from the way that nature supplies this abundant source that kind of funds and lines the pockets of tourism. So that's an interesting thing. But I love the fact that you make this report and that people have access to this that want to know more. And I think climate change is really a topic that people are taking more responsibility for now, and they do want to know this kind of information. And I'm really, really grateful that you both made this incredibly long period of time in your day to allow me to come over and visit you and to find out more. So thank you so much. And on behalf of the Gang of Witches for having this and making time to have this conversation.
So thanks a lot, Jo, for having us, and we are really happy to come spend this time sharing our knowledge with you. Thank you.
So thanks for shedding some light into our work, the Balearic Sea Report, and hopefully we can discuss more things in another podcast.
Yeah, I really appreciate this. And we'll see you ladies next year. Thank you so much.
It was the Ibiza podcast of Gang of Witches, hosted by Jo Youle. See you at the next new moon. Until then, take care of yourselves. Ciao.
I'm calling upon my witches everywhere, my witches everywhere. I'm calling upon my sisters everywhere, my brothers everywhere. The time has come to gather.